All right, let's dive right into this explainer by talking about a frustration that pretty much every working class American feels, completely regardless of political party. I mean, whether you lean left, right, or somewhere totally in the middle, you've probably looked at Washington, D.C. at some point and thought, you know what? They just aren't listening to us. It's a really heavy, frustrating feeling. But today, we're going to look at the hard data to show you that this disconnect, it isn't just in your head. It's actually a structural, mathematical reality of exactly how our federal government operates right now. It's the ultimate question, isn't it? Why do wildly popular ideas, policies that you, your neighbors, and supermajorities of Americans all completely agree on, why do they never seem to actually become law? Well, when Washington ignores the average American, it's not just because politicians are uniquely stubborn, and it's definitely not because voters are apathetic. As we'll see, it is a highly measurable, totally predictable outcome of the machinery we currently have in place. Section 1. The math behind the laws. To truly get this, we really have to look at the math. Back in a landmark 2014 study, political scientists Martin Gilens and Benjamin Page analyzed nearly 1,800 national policy issues. And by breaking down the 4 major theories of American politics, the results they found are frankly pretty stunning. Take majoritarian electoral democracy, which is basically just the idea that the average citizen drives policy. The data shows this is completely unsupported. In fact, when ordinary, working-class citizens and economic elites disagree on an issue, the average citizen's independent impact on federal law drops to virtually zero. On the flip side, high-income elites and corporate lobbies have a massive, measurable impact on what actually passes. So here is a gentle, but honestly pretty shocking reality check from that very same study. Whether a policy proposal has just 10% public support from average citizens or a massive 90% public support, its baseline chance of actually being enacted into federal law is a flat 30%. Really think about that for a second. Even if almost every single working-class American demands a change, the odds of it passing are exactly the same as if almost nobody wanted it. Section 2. What working Americans actually want. Let's step away from the academic theory for a minute and look at some specific, wildly popular policies to prove that this is a bottom versus top issue, not a left versus right issue. We're going to contrast what working Americans actually want with what the legislative reality ends up delivering. Starting with a massive issue of public integrity, look at this consensus. A staggering 80 to 86% of Americans favor a total ban on members of Congress and their spouses trading individual stocks while in office. This is not a partisan thing. Democrats, Republicans, and independents basically all agree that lawmakers shouldn't be making personal trades on the very industries they actively regulate. And this situation right here brilliantly illustrates what we call the oligarchy gap. That's the measurable divide between what the public wants and what federal policy actually is. Despite near universal agreement from all of us, a true trading ban just sits there, unenacted. Why? Well, because bipartisan congressional leadership routinely stalls these efforts to protect their own insider rent-seeking. So we're left with the Stock Act, which has incredibly weak oversight and minor administrative fines that do almost nothing to actually stop the behavior. Okay, turning over to public safety for a second. An overwhelming 85 to 96% of adults favor requiring universal background checks for all gun purchases. And just to be absolutely clear here, this massive majority explicitly includes over 80% of gun owners themselves. That makes it one of the strongest consensus positions in modern American political science. But yet again, the reality is starkly different from the public will. Bills to close private sale loopholes frequently pass the House only to get completely stalled out in the Senate. And this isn't just a political failure, right? It's a massive economic one, too. Because beyond the devastating human toll, this legislative blockade, which is heavily influenced by firearm manufacturer lobbying, costs the U.S. economy over $557 billion annually in healthcare, lost productivity, and emergency services. Now, shifting our focus to the economy and labor, up to 75% of Americans support raising the federal minimum wage to at least $15 an hour. This is a policy that would directly lift millions of families right out of poverty. Just to put that into perspective, for a full-time worker currently earning the federal minimum, a transition to $15 an hour would double their gross annual earnings from about $15,000 to over $31,000. But the grim reality of the statutory federal floor is that it has been completely frozen at a mere $7.25 an hour since July of 2009. That is literally the longest period without an increase since the wage was created way back in 1938. And why is that? because major business trade associations and corporate lobbies use their massive resources to block it in Congress. That effectively keeps roughly $100 billion annually in corporate profit margins, rather than shifting it into working-class labor income. Section 3. Why popular laws fail. So we really have to ask, how is this happening? Without pointing fingers at any specific political party, let's examine the mechanical, structural bottlenecks. The system isn't just randomly broken. It has very specific gatekeepers. To understand this, let's walk through the life cycle of how a popular bill dies. It's basically a 4-step gauntlet. First up, campaign finance. Because elections are so wildly expensive, elite donors essentially screen candidates, deciding who even gets to run long before you ever mark your ballot. Second is committee lobbying. Corporate trade groups use resources that absolutely dwarf public interest groups to just quietly stall bills out in committee. Third, the Senate filibuster. Because you need 60 votes instead of a simple 51-vote majority, a coalition of senators representing just 11% of the U.S. population can block laws that 80% of the country desperately wants. And fourth, gerrymandering. Politicians essentially draw their own uncompetitive district maps, meaning they never really have to answer to a broad majoritarian consensus. The data on passage rates objectively shows just how heavily tilted the system is toward those gatekeepers. If economic elites oppose a policy, it only has an 18% chance of passing. But if those very same economic elites support a policy, the passage rate jumps all the way to 45%. The rules of the game are quite literally structured to give the wealthiest individuals and corporate networks a functional veto over what the working class wants. You know, in political science, there's actually an academic term for all of this: biased pluralism. It's a system where legislative outcomes are completely dominated by corporate lobbies and business networks at the direct expense of average citizens. So when you feel outgunned by big money, you aren't just being cynical. You are accurately describing biased pluralism. It totally confirms that your frustration is rooted in a highly measurable, objective reality. Section 4. Fixing a broken system. But hey, here is the good news. Because this is a mechanical problem, it actually has concrete structural remedies. The research gives us the exact prescription we need to cure it, building a real pathway back to true representation. First, we can abolish or reform the Senate filibuster to a simple 51-vote majority, or at the very least, restore the talking filibuster so that obstruction carries a real political cost again. Second, passing the Disclose Act and establishing public campaign financing would replace all that elite donor gatekeeping with popular small dollar support. Third, enacting the Ethics Act would structurally sever that conflict of interest by strictly banning congressional stock trading. And finally, implementing ranked choice voting and using independent redistricting commissions would force politicians to actually appeal to a broad majoritarian coalition again. The rules of the game absolutely can be changed. To bring this entire narrative arc home perfectly, there's this incredibly powerful insight from the research itself. The disconnect between public preference and federal policy is neither an accident of nature nor a reflection of voter apathy. The political system is functioning as engineered. Just take a moment to let that sink in. The system isn't randomly broken. It is built this way. And you know what? What is engineered by people can absolutely be re-engineered by people. So I'm going to leave you with this final thought. Now that you know how the machinery actually operates behind the scenes, what will you do to change it? Understanding the true structural hurdles, the filibuster, the big money, the uncompetitive districts, it gives us a brand new lens to look at American politics. It proves that working-class Americans actually agree on a whole lot more than the media suggests. We just have to work together to fix the machine. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I highly encourage you to keep questioning the structures around you.